My grandmother on my father's side and I were extremely close. Even though my father passed away in an accident when I was quite young, I continued to visit her until I was in middle school. Having lost her son, she too always treated me well, saying that I was her son's only bloodline. My mum, though, didn't have a good relationship with her and never went to her house. My grandmother and I went to the shrine every Sunday morning. She was very religious and there was never weather bad enough to impede her from going. She never missed a single visit after my father passed away either. We always held hands as we walked and I can still feel her warmth. I absolutely loved our little weekly visits to the shrine. My grandmother would put her hands together, bow deeply, and close her eyes for long periods of time in prayer. Mine were always short and simple, and I would look up at my grandmother's serious face whenever I finished. I never failed to ask her what she prayed for when she was done, but not once did she ever tell me. She would just smile, take my hand in hers, and we would go get some ice cream, which was another weekly ritual after visiting the shrine. Now a bit about me. I've had strong psychic abilities since I was little and have always been troubled by them. I experienced sleep paralysis on a daily basis, which led to insomnia. I would feel something touching my legs in my sleep, something sharp like a needle poking me in my stomach, and it continued to escalate as I got older. My mum took me to various psychics, but they charged an exorbitant price and nothing they did ever worked, so we had no choice but to give up. By the time I reached my third year of middle school, it had become quite severe. I'd been in countless accidents and the sleep paralysis continued every day. There were times I saw insects and hair on my food when there actually wasn't. Others might call it hallucinations, but I know for a fact that they were caused by spirits. I was mentally exhausted and I stopped going to school. My grandmother came to visit me while my mum was at work and she always held my hand. It was only during these times that I felt at peace and could fully relax and rest. My mum worked late into the night, so we didn't have much quality time together. I threw up every day, and just when I started to suffer from anorexia, it turned into bulimia. Now my health was spiraling out of control too, and I tried to unalive myself a few times. I failed each time, and yet I was suffering every single day and I went into a deep depression. I didn't have the will nor the strength to continue going to the shrine with my grandmother anymore. A short time after I graduated middle school, she passed away. The only support I had was gone and I was devastated. I don't know how much I cried, but I locked myself in a room and refused to come out. I hugged her clothes tight and cried every single day. Even at this time, my mother seemed unaffected by everything and went about her day as if nothing happened. I remember being confused by this and feeling resentment towards her. About 2 weeks after my grandmother passed, I noticed that all the paranormal activity around me was beginning to dissipate. I only had 4 friends at this time and remember one of them telling me that my grandmother probably took all of it away from me when she died, and I remember breaking down and crying again. It was a whole year after my grandmother's passing that I was living a normal life again, free of everything that made my life hell up to that point. My mental and physical health were back to normal and I started attending high school and even started working part-time. I'd forgotten how it felt to be so happy and carefree. I began to make more friends and life was finally good again. Around this time, my grandmother's house was put on sale, so I went there to sort out her belongings. At this point, I was going to her grave every day to give my respects. When I was looking through her closet, I found a few old notebooks wrapped up neatly in a cloth. It was a stack of diaries and my grandmother had been writing in it every Sunday. I started to read her entries. The first page was about my father dying. I was told he had been in an accident, but that was a lie. Apparently, he had unalived himself and the reason for it was my mother's infidelity. To say that I was horrified is an understatement. I felt like someone punched me in the gut. I couldn't breathe and tears streamed down my face. My body went cold when I turned the page. It was filled with hateful and angry words towards me. The page was filled with writing and there was barely any white space between the words. It started off with my grandmother saying that I was actually a bastard child conceived between my mum and her love affair. She said she wanted to kill me, that she wished I would die. It was a side of her I never knew existed. I burned all the diaries. Every Sunday, when we went to the shrine, she was praying that I would slowly die in agony. She did it every single week for years, and what's worse, I was always standing right next to her as she did so. I guess her prayers and hatred were strong enough to literally make me extremely ill. My grandmother probably died suffering. No one could ever leave this earth peacefully with such hatred hidden within themselves for several long years. This is a story about an old house from the early Showa era, around 1930, which apparently still exists as an important cultural property in Setagaya City. The family that lived in it was an elite family of bureaucrats, a family of 5, the grandfather, husband, wife, and 2 children. One day, they started getting prank calls. The 2 daughters were already grown and married, so only the grandfather and the parents remained in the house. The calls always came late at night when everyone had gone to bed. It would ring dozens of times. Whenever one of them picked up, no one spoke a word on the other end. The husband got fed up with it. When the phone rang, he picked it up and kept the receiver off its cradle and left it on the floor, refusing to play the game. But when he tried to go to sleep, he would hear someone beginning to mumble on the phone. He would quickly grab it to hear what they were saying, but the person would go silent as soon as he did so. It continued like that for a few days. They would mumble something whenever the phone was on the floor, but would stop when the husband put it to his ear. He did everything he could to make it stop. He changed the number multiple times, called the phone company and told the police, but nothing ever worked. After a while, he began to think it was some kind of paranormal activity. He never used to believe in such things, but that was the only thing he could blame it on. He went to the shrine to get blessed, but that was of no help. The prank calls continued every single night, and the 3 living in the house was on the verge of a psychotic break. They eventually made the ultimate decision to sell the house. They were rich bureaucrats, and their house in that day was extremely high in value, but they couldn't see a way out of this torment. A few days after that was decided, the phone calls stopped. And a couple of days after that, the family received news that one of their daughters who lived close by had died. She had been beaten to death by her husband. It was an unbelievable tragedy. Although they knew that their daughter and her husband weren't on very good terms, they never imagined things were to this extreme. The police investigation turned up some letters addressed to her father, and the police handed them over to him. Upon reading it, he felt nothing but guilt and deep sorrow. All those phone calls had been made by his daughter. It was a call for help that she was desperately asking from her father every single night. Daddy, help me. Please help me, Daddy. A few months passed and the father had regained his sanity and somewhat overcome his guilt. They were still living in the same house as their daughter had died before a buyer came forward. It was around this time when one day the phone rang. They picked it up. No one said a word on the other end. It was another prank call. This was nothing less than a malicious, sick joke. Just like he had done before, whenever the calls came in, he put the phone on the floor to combat it. But then he would start hearing it, mumbling coming from the receiver whenever it was on the floor. It was impossible. It couldn't be his daughter because she was dead. Whoever was behind it had to be someone who knew the details of the case. That was obviously the only plausible, logical explanation. Then the father had a new idea. He went out and purchased a voice recorder, set it down next to the receiver that night, and began recording the mumbling sounds. When he woke up the next morning, he couldn't wait to hear what that recorder had captured. When he rewound the tape and hit play, he couldn't believe his ears. That's right. The voice belonged to his dead daughter. Now it was clear. There was no other explanation other than the fact that his daughter was still trying to reach out to him for help. He thought he was going crazy, and he finally sold the house and moved away. There have been several different owners since then, and everyone who lived there was apparently plagued by prank calls. Rumor has it that when the interior was being renovated, several long hairs believed to belong to a woman were discovered underneath the floorboards of where the phone used to sit. It's unclear as to who it actually came from. The interior work was called off, and the house has been preserved as an important cultural property to this day. If you're interested to know where that house is, I can't help you because its exact location seems to have been removed from the map. In the winter of my second year of university, the contract for the apartment I was living in was about to expire, so I decided to make a fresh start. I went to a real estate agent, told them what I was looking for, and was introduced to a nice-looking apartment that was close to the station. The rent was cheaper than my previous place too, so I wasted no time and asked them to go see it. The complex had 8 floors and, like I said, looked nice from the outside, and it also had an elevator. The room I was looking at was Unit 506, a corner room on the 5th floor. The first impression I got when the real estate agent opened the door was that it was dark inside. Like very dark. Even if the windows were placed so that the sun didn't hit it all that much, it was no excuse for how dark the room actually was. The sun was high in the sky, and yet it gave off the feeling like it was already beginning to set. It was the darkest from the entrance to the living room, which included the bathroom and the kitchen. The ceiling in the living room was extremely low, and there was a shelf where one could set up an altar. This space was again unusually dark and gave off some extremely creepy vibes, to say the least. On the bright side, the location was perfect, so considering the fact that I have 0 psychic senses, I decided to ignore my initial feelings and signed the contract. My first day in my new apartment, I found that the darkness didn't really amount to anything as long as I had the lights on. I made dinner for my friend who had helped me unpack my things earlier in the day, and we were eating when he said, "Don't you feel like something's off about this apartment?" I asked him to elaborate, and the following are some of the things he listed off. 1. It was weirdly silent even though there was a train station really close by. 2. We couldn't hear a single sound coming from the neighbors. 3. The room was dark, and it was especially dark in the 4 corners of the ceiling. 4. The air felt muggy and heavy, as if someone had smoked a cigarette in the room, but without the smell. I couldn't refute any of it, but like I said, as long as the lights were on and I opened the windows to refresh the air, it didn't bother me all too much. A few days passed without incident. One night, I got home later than usual because of work. I walked up to the elevator, but it was under maintenance, so I had to walk up the stairs to the 5th floor. I went to the end of the hall to Unit 506 and opened the door. I immediately felt like something was off. I reached over to the light switch and pressed it, but nothing happened. I switched it on and off a few times, but no go. My unease increased tenfold, but I couldn't do anything about the dead light, so I took my shoes off and stepped into my apartment. If it's dark during the day, you can pretty much guess that it's pitch dark at night without a light. I put my hand on the wall and slowly made my way towards the living room. Just as I got to the kitchen sink, I froze. Someone was standing in the middle of the living room. The person was very tall and skinny. I could vaguely see the blurry outline from the minuscule light that was coming in from the window. I couldn't see what they were wearing, nor make out the details of their face. My initial panic stemmed from the fact that someone was in my apartment. I was paralyzed and couldn't move. And then it happened. The person slowly began to make his way towards me. It looked like he was dragging his feet as it moved. Before I knew it, I was in full flight mode and I had ran out of my room and bounded down the stairs to the ground floor. Just as I did, the elevator also reached the ground floor and I heard the doors open. Something inside told me not to look back. I almost stumbled out of the building and ran non-stop to the closest convenience store. After this, I stayed at my friend's house for a few days, broke my lease a month later, and moved into an old-ass apartment. You guys have probably heard stories like this before, so I apologize if it's nothing new to you. But this is something that I really did experience. I've had to move a few times since then, and one rule I've strictly adhered to is to never move into a super dark apartment, ever again. This is a story from 15 years ago when I was in 5th grade. The elementary school I attended was located in a rural area and was the size of a tiny village. There were only about 30 students in the entire school, but because of rapid depopulation, the number of students is probably less than 10 now. Thus, the wooden school building was renovated into a new one built in concrete and had been turned into a nursing home. Since it was such a small school, relationships between students and teachers were very different. Students viewed teachers as friends, and all the teachers were very involved with the community. Some even drove students home if they were late leaving the school due to club activities. One of our favorites, myself included, was our school principal. Our teacher was very busy because I think he was going through training to become the vice principal. He was therefore gone a lot of the time, and many of our subjects were taught by a substitute teacher. But she too had other work commitments, so couldn't make it all the time. During the hours when no teachers were available to us, the principal came to watch over us. He didn't teach us anything. He came in and we played trivia games, or he would share stories about his childhood, basically tell us anything at the request of us children. And nothing got us more excited, of course, than his scary stories, which were all apparently true. So today, I wanted to share the one that stuck with me the most to this day. It might not sound very scary, but that's probably due to my crappy writing skills. Anyway, I'll be speaking from the principal's point of view from here on out. This was back when I was still a new teacher. Having just become one, I didn't know my left from my right, so I taught during the day and studied at night. They were extremely busy days, and I don't remember having much time for myself back then. I was in charge of 5th grade, like you guys, for years. One day during swimming class, one of the students, let's call the boy C, approached me. He was a very serious and introverted boy. He told me he wanted to discuss something with me. Now that I think about it, I basically locked myself in the staff room during breaks and after school to work and study, so it was probably hard to catch me. It was nearing summer break, so C must have felt a sense of urgency and decided to try to talk to me during class instead. But it was during class, so I hastily told him I would make time for him the following day. And lo and behold, it completely slipped my mind the next day, and summer break began without hearing what C wanted to talk to me about. It was during summer vacation when the teachers received terrible news. C had died in a car accident. I attended his funeral, and my only emotion was that of regret for not taking the time to hear him out, for being too busy and caught up in my own life that I didn't even bother to make time for my student. It was a hot, humid night. School would be starting again soon. I was already asleep when I heard a sound that didn't belong and it woke me up. I used to live in a one-story house and there was another room between my bedroom and the entrance. The entrance was an old Japanese-style door that you slide open. The sound was coming from that direction. I sat up, opened my fusuma door a couple of inches, and peeked out. I could see straight through to the entrance and saw that it was half open. Was it the wind? I didn't think much of it, and I had good reason. Back in those days, many people went to bed with their doors unlocked. The world wasn't such a scary place then. So, I got up and went to close it. The sound I heard must have been the sound of the door opening little by little. I walked back to my room, got into my futon, and closed my eyes to go back to sleep. Well, I tried anyway. My eyes flew open when I heard the same creaking noises. There wasn't any wind outside, so what was causing those sounds? And then it hit me. It was C. He had come to see me. He was still trying to get my attention. For some unknown reason, I grabbed my acoustic guitar, which was sitting in the corner of my room, hugged it tight, hid under the covers, and yelled out, "C, I'm so sorry. It was my fault that you couldn't talk to me. Please don't come in. Please." After this, the sounds stopped. You kids might not know this, but us teachers still have to go in to do paperwork and prep work during school holidays. So the next day when I went to school, I talked to an older female teacher about what had happened the night before. I didn't care whether she might think I'm crazy, a grown adult being scared of strange noises during the night, but I needed advice. I didn't want C to come back again that night. She actually listened to me with a serious face and didn't utter a word until I finished talking. When she finally did, she said, "Did you go and visit C's grave after he passed?" The question threw me off, and the answer was no. I attended his funeral, but I hadn't been to his grave yet to pay my respects. She could probably tell by my face that I hadn't been there yet. She smiled and said, "It's not too late now. Take some incense sticks and offerings and go visit his grave. Apologize to him there for not being able to be there for him when he needed you." I ran out of the school and immediately headed for C's grave. I put my hands together in prayer in front of his grave and apologized profusely. "C, I'm really sorry. It was all my fault. Please forgive me." That night, C didn't appear. He didn't appear on any subsequent nights either. And then summer vacation ended. As I was beginning to wonder if what happened that night was a dream, a girl in the next class apparently suddenly stood up, looked up at the ceiling, and let out a blood-curdling scream before convulsing and collapsing to the floor. She was rushed to the hospital, and fortunately, her injuries were not life-threatening. I had formulated a hypothesis about what might have happened, and it wasn't long before my thoughts were confirmed by a rumor I happened to hear being whispered amongst the students. "Hey, did you know that C used to like that girl? I saw him looking at her all the time. Maybe she fainted because..." That's right. The shy boy, C, couldn't discuss his feelings for the girl to any of his fellow classmates. He wanted to talk to me about it. He probably saw me as an older brother kind of figure. But because of me and how wrapped up I was in my own life, he died without being able to talk to anyone about his feelings. That feeling was probably so strong that his spirit was still unable to cross over, and maybe that day he tried to take the girl with him. That was the end of our principal's story. It remains etched in my heart, and I don't think I will forget it till the day I die. I've met many different teachers over the years, but him, with his scary stories and a constant smile on his face, the cool principal that allowed students to hang out in his office and played with us out in the schoolyard. No other teacher has ever come close to how amazing this man was. When he was transferred to another school, I cried like hell. I cried even more than I did at my own graduation. To this day, my respect for him has remained the same, and all I can say is, thank you.